everybody, and welcome back to another episode of On the Record here at Out on That Line. I am Alex, and we are wincing the night away tonight, folks. And no, we're not doing the shins. We will be doing New Found Glory's Sticks and Stones. But before we get down to the business of breaking bones, with words that will always harm me, it's my co-hosts, as always, Tanner and Jeff. Sending it to you first, Tanner. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be back to do another deep dive on a very revered album. And yeah, just feeling heavily bruised, but not broken after listening to this album a ton of times over the last couple of days again and reacquainting myself.
Phenomenal.
This album, Sticks and Stones, is, to me, one of the greatest pop punk albums of all time. You know, I think there is a Mount Rushmore you can make of pop punk albums, and for me, it's going to be Lucky Boys Confusion Throwing the Game. It's going to be New Found Glory, Sticks and Stones. It's going to be Sum 41, All Killer No Filler. And you could throw, really, there's like 4 Blink albums. You could pick one of them and probably goes on that Mount Rushmore just fine. But Sticks and Stones, to me, kind of stands above the rest as far as when I think of pop punk. Like, this is the album that I think of.
Yeah, and this is interesting because as I talked about on the one we just recorded for Listen Up, which I think will probably come out first because it's so relevant. But I kind of mentioned that when we talked about doing Listen Up, you kind of Jeff started talking about New Found Glory and mentioned like Sticks and Stones as a good baseline and kind of an exciting place to start. And so it's like, normally if I have the time with an artist that we've never done before, I'm like, well, I'll try to go back and get some context. Something like Bon Iver, I did that for. It gives you something to compare it to, but also it's kind of nice when you just kind of walk in with something that's foreign to you. You kind of, it's nice to have like a little bit of a basis, but then also be able to just kind of be the new guy. Like, I'm the new guy in the New Found Glory circle here. But I mean, immediately Sticks and Stones, I started listening to it and I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is really fucking good. And, you know, disappointed that this was kind of a missing chunk in my education as a youngin'. But yeah, for you to put it in that pantheon, that's it makes total sense to me. So this is probably the one I listen to more than Catalyst, but I do know that Tanner, even though we're not covering Catalyst, is a Catalyst guy. And before we kind of dive into the Sticks and Stones conversation, I'd like to get Tanner's impressions and why he thinks Catalyst edges out Sticks and Stones.
I think a large part of it is like personal preference. Catalyst was like, newer when I was, 14. And All Downhill From Here was like everywhere. Like the music video was on TV and stuff, and that was kind of how I got into them. And so like at that point in time, I didn't really have any friends that liked them. So I didn't have anybody that was like, oh yeah, you should check out their last album. It's really, really good. Let me burn you a copy or borrow my copy. So I never really knew the songs I'll be honest, off of this album. I did not know them until I saw them play live in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time I ever heard My Friends Over You was when they encored it, and the place was going absolutely bananas. People were like hanging off the rafters, dude. And like, I'm like, whoa, because like they played a lot of stuff that I liked off Catalyst, and they played stuff off their new album Coming Home that had just come out. I was like, nice, hell yeah, got some new stuff to listen to. And then yeah, encore happened, and I was like, absolute pandemonium.
Yeah.
But yeah, so diving back into this, later, it's not one that if I get the itch to listen to New Found Glory, I don't go seek this album out. That's obviously going to be changing. But like Catalyst is like my go-to. That's like my home base. And it's just because of when I kind of got into them. But yeah, this album, I don't want to like overstate it, how good this album is and how influential. You go back and little flourishes they do on certain songs of his, and you're like, wow, like this, they're ahead of the game. But yeah, so that would just be like my little thing about Catalyst. Is just the timing, and I love that record. I'd love to talk about that record at length sometime on here on the channel.
We could, I mean, there's I think there's definitely some love for Newfound Glory, a newfound love for Newfound Glory on this channel, for sure. So I mean, speaking of how influential they are, there's a song on this album called The Story So Far, and they're also one of the like luminaries of kind of the next wave of pop punk music, named themselves after that song, another band called The Story So Far. So really, to me, Newfound Glory, I feel like when you talk about a band like Blink-182 or Green Day, that, you know, was even a little bit before that, but definitely was certainly as relevant during that pop punk movement in the late 90s and 2000s. You know, you think about Blink-182, Green Day, they get mentioned as like the kind of top level versions of that scene, right? And I think deservedly so, obviously, but I think Newfound Glory gets very unfairly left out of that conversation. When you talk about an album like Sticks and Stones, and then going into Catalyst, which was even bigger and better, you know, as far as production quality, things like that, like Sticks and Stones, to me, I feel like just had much more of a like rawness to it, much more of a like attitude. It was a little bit less polished than Catalyst, so it was a little more felt like punk music more than pop punk music, like Catalyst did. But Catalyst then got like heavier too, so it was like weird how kind of the evolution they went on with it. But for me, the opening riff of Understatement to start this album, and then his like lyrics, "I'm sick of smiling and so is my jaw," like just what a way to start an album. Like you get that snarl, you get that attitude, and it's just such a good riff too. It's just such a tasty, heavy riff. And the way that they pop into these choruses, I don't know that there's a band that does that better than Newfound Glory. Like Hooks, I feel like is Newfound Glory's game. I think the only other band that maybe gets as close to that is Sum 41, another of my like another band that made a Mount Rushmore album for me. You know, there's certain feelings you get where it's like, it's almost like you can tell they have like more of a metal background than they do a background in anything else, and they're just kind of like framing it, because the way Newfound Glory does their breakdowns, and it's like very metalcore. Like I don't know that any metalcore bands in the like 2010s would acknowledge Newfound Glory as a influence, but they have to, you know, because you cannot have breakdowns like this and have that kind of screamo type music in the background, like Tanner, you mentioned on the last episode, how they kind of scream a little bit but not that much. I feel like on Sticks and Stones, probably the most screaming they do. And I just think it's one of those things where it sometimes feels like it's about to go off the rails, but it never does, you know. And that's the kind of feeling I love to have in music, where it's like you're in control, but it's like not too tight a grasp on it, you know. And I think for me, the attitude when you first get into Understatement, and then just the sheer like smarminess of My Friends Over You, and the way that he hits that chorus, "I'd still pick my friends over you," and then that in the riff hits right after that. The way that they do those, like the key changes, the breakdowns, the like dropping the rest of the band out of the background while he just sings like solo, and then they come in with this crunchy riff behind it. They do that so much on this album, and that is just gives me the purest feeling of what pop punk is supposed to be, is like the entirety of this album.
And they're so dialed in, like musically. This is so unbelievably tight. Like, yes, you have these great hooks, great turnarounds, the hardcore breakdowns, the like melodic punk vocals to it. Like, there's so much in the mix that requires like the excellence of technical execution. Because like when you say like, oh, it almost falls apart, it's like, you know, if you go to a Six Flags, there's a tacit understanding that you're going to go on the roller coaster, and there should be some trust that the roller coaster is solidly built. So there will be points where you feel like you're not in control, but it's not necessarily that your life was ever in danger. Now, unfortunately, sometimes you go and you lose a foot. But in this case, and that's when you listen to Pup, is you go on a wooden roller coaster and you lose your feet in a very pleasing way, mind you. but I think from a production standpoint, but then also like a pure musicianship, they execute like these hairpin turns musically, and it's just perfect. It sounds crisp and excellent and totally dialed in, totally in sync with one another. It's very, very, very gratifying. Like, as much as I love gooby experimental kind of stuff and like maybe more daring choices with your instrumentation or like time signatures and stuff like that, there is something that is so pure. It's like eating the best apple you've ever had. It's good for you. It's pure. You can bite into it and it just snaps. And this is that kind of music where it's just reliably tight and so enjoyable for just sticking right to its lane.
If you were able to like distill like the term pop punk like down, I think that My Friends Over You is what you would find.
100%.
I think that's the perfect essence of what pop punk should be. It's every aspect of it. It's like, you just go through the song, like huge opening, super sick guitar riff. You know they're gonna hit you over the head with that guitar riff, and you're just like, yes, yes, give it to me. And then the kind of time changes that happen, how it kind of goes like double time-ish in the chorus, and then it opens back up, super, super big. The mix is amazing. There were a lot of bands that had lead singers in this era that were kind of like, I don't know, pretty boys. They would kind of like, I don't know, make it about kind of them more than the band.
Mm-hmm.
And New Found Glory is like a totally badass, tight-knit band that is so tight. Everything they do, if they want to change it up a little bit just for like one beat or one measure, they do it, and they all just like do it like with crazy precision. They're the My Friends Over You, it's like the perfect pop punk song. And I know that like a lot of people out there might say something like Sugar We're Going Down by Fall Out Boy. It's kind of like in the similar as like the distilling it down. It's like, no way, dude. Like that's just this song. They're just doing this. Like New Found Glory was doing this before basically everybody in pop punk was doing their thing.
Mm-hmm.
They even get discovered by Blink-182. Mark Hoppus is like, these guys fucking rock. And yeah, so I want to obviously keep going through the album, but My Friends Over You, like zero notes, perfect song, and it goes 1-2 right off the bat, boom boom, they hit you in the face so hard.
Yeah,
the first two songs, you're just like, whoa, wait a minute.
yeah. In the way the second pre-chorus, when they like the just maybe you need this, and they do like the recall, like just maybe you need this, and I didn't mean to lead you on in the way that drum just like just hits those like those quarter notes or eighth notes or whatever it is there, and it just hammers back into that the My Friends Over You into the chorus, like just so good. I remember the first time I heard that song, and you just the energy that you felt from that, and you go from Understatement, which has just like a really, you know, I wouldn't say that's a pop punk type of riff. It's a pop punk song, I guess, not typical pop punk riff. Like My Friends Over You is the quintessential perfect pop punk song. And then you go into Sunny, and it's sad. Like it's just, you realize that there's more to the songwriting with New Found Glory than just beer and bloodstains. You know, to throw it forward, I guess, to the Listen Up album that they just recently came out with. You know, I think for me, there's a maturity and a realization that they have a lot to learn that makes New Found Glory feel as authentic as they are, where it doesn't feel like they're affecting any of this stuff. You know, it doesn't feel like they're doing any sort of put on. These are like feelings they've had. Maybe some of it gets embellished, but they're not trying to claim a Nobel Prize for literature here. You know, they're not trying to be more than what it is. And because I think what they realized was what they had was perfect as it was.
And I just like the sense of self that there is in the lyrics, like to loop back to My Friends Over You, just like as simple of a notion as that is, like I'd still pick my friends over you. And you were everything I wanted. So it's kind of, again, wrestling with stuff that we've all gone through at some point or something similar to it, keeping it simple, keeping it relatable, but not being prescriptive. I think there's a huge difference. Like, there are artists who it's like total solipsism and they just like talk about themselves. And I love Haley Williams. I constantly dunk on that one she made right after the divorce because it was a tough listen. It was a tough listen. It was a little too much emotional honesty and a little too much insight. You can go too far in that direction. You know, and eventually it's just this mortal coil. It'll end in tears. You're just like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I'm making myself depressed listening to this. And on the other side of the coin, you can have people that are, you know, if you've got someone like Haley Williams in that album being like, why God, why? You can have these very prescriptive, typically the like militantly political albums in one direction or another will like go hard on like, this is what you need to do. This is the answer. Why aren't you doing this? And that can also be a turnoff because you don't want to be reminded what a piece of shit you are when you're listening to music. You want something that's right in the middle. I'm sharing an experience with you. And maybe if you can take something away from what I'm talking about, that's going to elevate you. And that's the most I can hope for in this music. I'm not trying to bring you down. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm trying to tell you what's going on with me. And I'm doing it in a very angsty, over the top, interesting, fast paced way without wallowing in any of this. Like, there's no poor me to be detected. There's just a lot of emotional honesty on it. And again, firing on all cylinders with the production backing just this wonderful, wonderful musicianship and doing, again, I said on the listen up part, you got to sprinkle a little bit of pixie dust on these things from song to song so that there's just enough of a difference in the flavor. You got to do a little something different with your drumming or your bass or throw a little treat out there on guitar. Do something a little daring vocally. And you don't have to like radically reinvent the whole formula. You just have to kind of keep it interesting or it's all going to roll together. And this album for me, I think has a great flow and has great variety within their sound.
I think that is a strength of this one compared to the Listen Up album that we just did. Is I think the criticism that you can have about the Listen Up album is that it does not have the variety that this one does. I think when you have, you know, and it could be the lyrical content, you know, it could be, you know, what that emotion is going to be. You know, there's very sad songs about death on this one. There's songs about, you know, breaking up, you know, more lighthearted stuff like jokes and things like that in there. You know, but I think there is a huge variety, and there's also a variety in kind of which instruments are leading the way more so than on Listen Up. You know, there's several albums here where, you know, you get kind of a basic drum beat and then a really tasty bass riff, and then the guitars come in. So there's like different ways that they kind of lead you into these songs, different ways that they lead you into those choruses, those breakdowns, and it's kept very, very fresh. You know, we talk about songs like Understatement and My Friends Over You. You know, another song like Something I Call Personality would fit right along those lines with those songs as well. But then you'll have songs like Sunny, like The Great Houdini, like Singled Out, you know, that are a little bit more emotionally raw and vulnerable, I think, where it's getting more into like the real feelings of like, why can't I just make this work? You know, and I think the idea that it's focused on, you know, there is a, you know, like you said, Alex, there's a sense of self with this. This is not blaming everything that's wrong on external forces. It's understanding your place in kind of things that are going wrong. It's not eliminating blame for those external sources, because there's still plenty of that they talk about on this album. But it's there's a balance, right? It's you can't trust somebody that never looks at another perspective, and it's hard to get into an artist where it's all a same kind of one note. It's always I. You know, classic example, Taylor Swift is probably the most prime one, where it's like there is no other perspective she can write under because there is no thought about anything but herself. You know, I think when you look at a band like Newfound Glory, who I will say is probably one of the most lacking in controversies of any of those punk or emo bands from that era, because it was rife with controversy. You know, like stick a bunch of immature band members that want to live a rock star lifestyle and stick them in close proximity with a bunch of high school girls and see how that goes. And we saw exactly how that went. You know, I don't remember ever hearing anything like that about Newfound Glory. You know, correct me if I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. But I think they've always been a band that really focused on the music first, and the party lifestyle just happened because they were good at music. So I think when they approached it that way, and it wasn't just to be a rock star, although that was probably still a really fun part of the whole experience, like they really made some kick-ass music. Like that's really what it comes down to, is they knew how to write a hook better than anybody in that scene at that time, you know, until a young man named Claudio Sanchez really started putting his stamp on the genre. Like hooks like that, you know, you had Blink-182 who had some really good hooks and stuff, but Blink-182 really, like, their whole songs were hooks. Like that was a whole different kind of ball game. You know, like all the small things, like everybody of my age group knows every single word to that song. You know, there's no like part of it, but it's like that. I feel like Newfound Glory was just as good as Blink at writing those kind of big choruses, those breakdowns, those like kind of callback, call and response types of lyrics and stuff. I think they were a little less jokey, I think, than Blink-182 was. You know, I don't remember a lot of fart jokes in Newfound Glory songs, but they also didn't take themselves that seriously. You know, I think taking the music seriously but not themselves is always a recipe for something good.
Yeah, and I think that, to echo one of your more recent points, Jeff, the fact that they were a band, they took it damn seriously. There's a quote that Chad Gilbert had. He said, when Sticks and Stones came out, we were doing that Honda Civic tour. We were getting compared to bands like Good Charlotte and Simple Plan. We were angry with that. At that point, we were getting compared to more pop bands, and we aren't a pop band. And they're not. I you know, they kind of did get lumped in just because of like the age group. I mean, Jordan Pudnick was 22 when they recorded this album.
Yeah, that's crazy.
22 years old. I was doing some quick math over here. Was not expecting that. Also, this album hit number 4 on the Billboard 200. Like this was a little bit bigger than I think I remember it being. Like this.
Yeah.
And it's like, again, it's like a musical ripcord. It's like a spinning top. You pull the ripcord on the thing and you drop the top, or what is it, Babe? You drop the Beyblade in the arena, yeah, and you just watch it go to work, and it just whirs around, and that's what they do on these songs. They just whir around. They're one unit. They whir around, and again, they do a lot of the things that a band that you mentioned earlier, Jeff. Lucky Boys Confusion. I find a lot of similarities in the ebb and flow of like a really good Newfound Glory album and a really good Lucky Boys album. Because it's like there are going to be sad moments. They are going to show that they can write a song that has like depth and meaning and is like sad, as a sad subject matter. Blink-182 doesn't do that a whole lot. They did Adam's Song, which is obviously like a great song, but then like 2 songs later, a guy's dick's out. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Good.
Yeah, no, it's just coming off the back of you saying you didn't realize like just how big of a deal that this album might have been at the time. I'm just looking at like an aggregate of some of the ratings it got at the time, and it's very, very split. There were certain publications that were like, this is an 8 out of 10. There, Ultimate Guitar gave it a 10 out of 10. Rolling Stone gave it 2 stars. You know, you have a bunch of people giving like generally that don't necessarily use a rating system, giving like unfavorable marks to it. But then you have people who like Kerrang is totally over the moon. It's very interesting how polarized people were. And I think it must just be a product of the time, because I think you'd have a hard time today going back and listening to this and having much of a problem with it, other than like if that kind of music's just not for you. I feel like a lot of this rating might have to do with gatekeeping, which is more of a testament to like, oh, we got to protect like, you know, the hardcore and metalcore, and like we can't really like grandfather these guys with this voice, and it smacks of like a hesitancy to open up the genre, kind of what we see going on in country these days, where there's a hesitancy to like consider the Beyonce country album a country album and that kind of thing.
There was, and I remember back when this album came out, because I was deep into Lucky Boys Confusion at this point when this album came out. So it's like, because I remember I got the Lucky Boys Confusion Throwing the Game album my freshman year of high school. I think the All Killer No Filler album was around like pretty soon after that. And then I got this album, I think, what was it, 2002? So my, either spring, my last part of my freshman year, or maybe it was fall, my sophomore year, I can't remember. But I remember getting this album, and there was a lot of kids that were more into like the real punk music, like, Cro-Mags and bands like that thought a band like New Found Glory was for posers, that word that would get thrown around all the time back then by, skateboarders and punk rockers and everybody that thought that their taste in music was the only true and real taste. So a band like New Found Glory came out and had all this like major success. I didn't even realize they charted that high. Like number 4 on the Billboard charts is pretty crazy for a punk album. Especially because I think the pop punk scene had not reached its like critical mass yet, that this album like broke through that kind of zeitgeist. I can imagine probably Green Day and Blink are probably the only other pop punk bands that ever maybe did better than that. I don't even think Green Day probably ever did. Maybe Dookie, but that's probably it. Maybe American Idiot, actually, that was pretty big. But I do remember specifically people that really, they love the Sex Pistols. They loved all those, like, what you consider the like 3 chords and a lot of anger kind of punk bands. And they thought New Found Glory was a pop version, just an imitation of like what punk music is supposed to be. And I think not giving an album like Sticks and Stones a real chance because you think it's a poser type of thing, I think is exactly the attitude that led to a lot of like negative reviews. Because I just don't know how you listen to this album, and whether you like pop punk music or not, don't understand that it's an absolutely incredible album.
Yeah, and real quick before I let Tanner rip, I go back to, if you're not a fan, you're not a fan. But how can you not objectively listen to this and what would you say is wrong with it? You know what I mean? Like, what is your argument for saying that it's not good? At this, you really can only say it's not my kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just, I don't know how, like, I'm just trying to come up with different ways to say this album is like perfect. And you mentioned the Rolling Stones review. I looked it up and kind of read it, and it just reads like, nowadays, like a magazine like Rolling Stone or whatever it is, an internet entity, whatever, they have people that are very tuned into like all kinds of music, and it's like those people's thing. The Rolling Stone review reads like a guy that's like 50 listening to this album, and like, hey man, like, good on you for listening. I bet it missed you. And then he just like trashes it instead of being like, they're very competent musicians. The hooks are good. I just don't. I don't recognize the stories. I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't relate to it. And that is what a lot of bands kind of this era ran into as well. Like, there's a lot of, not to like make it about an older generation, but like classic rock radio was still really, really big at this time.
Oh yeah.
People were still clinging to like the hits of the 80s. And there was kind of a new generation of stuff that we now look back on with great reverence and nostalgia that, I don't know. I like to think that when I'm 50, if a band puts out a badass album like this, I'll be like, hell yeah, this thing absolutely rocks. Not like, oh, it's not Boston.
Yeah.
Play more than a feeling.
Yeah. Like, I think that a lot of the contemporary reviews, I don't know. It's a very interesting, almost case study that I'm just like kind of scratching the surface on, of like, who liked this, who didn't like this, if people that didn't like this, what did they say? It's never like the band is bad.
Yeah, I bet Pitchfork would have given this like a 6.5. The snooty pricks.
Pitchfork.
Bitch fuck.
I did that. I did like the PG one.
I love editing.
Well,
yeah.
well, gentlemen, were there any certain songs that you wanted to make sure you shouted out that if people were going to get into this one, or are you going to be like me and just track one, let it rip?
No, there's no reason for anybody out there to ever skip a song on this album.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like one big song. No, it's like if you're skipping songs on this, or if you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just a head-on collision, person. It's like, no, you're not. You like the whole thing. If you like one, you like it all.
Yeah.
It's 40 minutes. It's 40 minutes long. It's 40 minutes long.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
yeah.
me, like, wherever you want to start on this album, you're going to end up listening to the whole thing.
I'm gonna eat the whole thing. 40 minutes, and it feels like half that. It's a cruise missile. If you really just want to listen to, again, technical excellence with relatable lyrics, and you want to get a little hit off that nostalgia, why not? Ain't nothing wrong with that. It doesn't play on it, obviously, because it's a product of the time it was written. The Listen Up album 100% could have played on nostalgia, and it didn't fall into that trap. This is the kind of nostalgia you can go take a whiff of and feel good about.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are my closing thoughts. Are we ready to send this to the hopper?
I think we're ready to shoot this one to the moon, baby.
Okay, well, you know where to find us, youtube.com/C/out on that line. And we are on Spotify. Unfortunately, were I to try to give you some kind of link to that, it would be a bunch of commie gobbledygook. It's just like a bunch of letters and numbers and shit. We don't have a nice custom URL, but just by searching Out on That Line on Spotify podcast, you will find us. You will see what we have begun to do there. I took the time and the pains to start putting the video on there. Spotify video. It's the new gold rush. Your video podcast. Listen, all the people on The Office, even people that were on for like 2 seconds, have a podcast. That's our competition. We're trying to beat them, folks. So like and subscribe, turn your notifications on, and follow us on Spotify, and listen every week, and we will reward your fealty tenfold.
Yes. Thank you, Tanner, for joining us once again, and we will look forward to next time.